I think nothing much is, I cannot, sorry.
I would like to start by saying that it was a great pleasure reading this book. But it's for a long time that we have read economic history books, the last being Neeladri's book, where you can really feel the depth and the narrative structures coming out. The quantitative and the qualitative evidence meshed together in a beautiful way. That's why it's a really, I think the first reaction I had, it's a beautifully written book. It's really beautifully written. I wanted to point out two things. First is that one central argument of her is that the mitigation of famine and malaria, or the lethality of malaria, decline of lethality of malaria, and decline generally of the crude death rates in India after the 1920s had to do with what she has said, also apart from shifts in how famines are at least prevented, rather than just the focus on preventing famines, rather than just doing it at the what is it called, established famine. When the famine is already there, you have to read her book. But if you've read the famine commissions, or if you heard earlier accounts, how calibrated it used to be. How many people are going to come? There were these two tests of distance. How many miles the poor will walk, or the famished will walk, until they are considered a famine. If they're walking 15 miles, means they are really desperate. That's when famine would be declared. Before that, so these were called test relief cases, and the wages were kept down to see at what level people will come to work. Now this was a part and parcel of a particular way of imagining, which is one of the points she did, Neeladri has pointed out, but it's more explicitly in the late 19th century, in a laissez-faire mode of thinking that state should not intervene in kind of trying to intervene in the market. Basically, state shouldn't intervene in the market. So for instance, you can have exports of food grain going on despite large death in this period. Now the point about this shift, one of the points she makes is also not merely the pressure from, not a point which Neeladri has raised, which I think is very valid, in order to see how the nationalist critique of famines and poverty in the 19th century was very crucial in the response, even though they dismissed it. Famously, Curzon's critique of R.C. Dutt, when they said, well, population is growing, the population was actually falling that decade. That had fallen massively in that decade, but he had put out that everything is, we have the lowest revenue assessment, we have all kinds of things. So the big debate on that, but actually it changed, it shifts the policy. Just like Rahul Gandhi's suit boot ki sarkar, whatever you say, it shifted in some way. Narendra Modi's sarkar's certain way of responding to moving towards some ameliorative gestures or policies and all. But this shift was also due to something she meant, and that's very important, and that's where I connect, though I'm also trained as an agrarian historian. But she takes up the second report which Christopher wrote, which was malaria in Punjab. The second one is called Malaria in Duars, in the tea gardens of Duars. So that's where I connected. Actually, she found me from one essay that I had written in 1990 about the connection between what are the cause of massive death in Assam. Now there was a big debate about thousands of immigrants, millions of people who had taken from central provinces or central India to work in Assam tea gardens, and with high mortality throughout this period. And there was a big debate whether this was due to their inherited diseases, or was it due to conditions of work, or conditions of, and I had argued by using this that you cannot explain this high level of mortality without looking at what the conditions of work was. And that's what actually in Duars, which is not Assam but in the Bengal, which Christopher had studied along with Bentley, a tea garden official, that they found this deaths, malarial deaths, not so much due to whatever transmission problems of vector issues, or so much as, but very directly connected to conditions of work. And conditions of work mean just not low wages, but relations of work also. The way they were controlled, and so that, you in Assam, for instance, even if you were dying, you couldn't escape the gardens because you were controlled under this. So it actually led to massive death threats in certain places in Assam, up to what, 12 per 100, sometimes 12%, 15% death rates in certain gardens. Very high death rates. It's my very I was barely, I had not done the relation between all the disease factors, but by showing that the conditions of work was more important, the way the work was controlled, I think Shiela found me out from there and connected with my work and it's still but it's a very, very, I must say that I'm really grateful to Shiela that she found this essay and connected with me, and that it also, it is very much strengthens her thesis, although that was not my main aim. My main aim was not to show why mortality was there, but to show how the system produced a particular type of regime of mortality, and that was my aim. But that was the connection. So post-9/9, so the shift, the argument I had was to shift, what is it leading for the colonial state to shift its labor policy in Assam from about this same time, 1915, 17, 1920s. What is allowing them to, what motivates them? Why don't they just continue with that? What is happening to that? So this shift is towards a slightly more ameliorative condition, a slightly more ameliorative, and leads to declines of death rates, quite stunning declines of death rates all over India. But this is not explainable. That demographic history post 1920s of massive shift cannot be explained by either so much. So you can see at certain conditions, small public interventions or changes in policies can have big impact, and it did have big impact. And that's why it was for a long time never considered as central. Even the nationalist or the nationalist historians would not see the shift, the subtle shift in the colonial policies, which were, whatever their motivations for various reasons, were shifting towards a slightly more, what in labor history we call towards a more focus on social reproduction, rather than just focus on just getting resources and extractive resources. How to get a more reproductive labor or labor force or to kind of prevent wastage of labor. We can see these shifts which are happening throughout from the 1920s onward. That's a major shift that I would now. So her argument that they would double, there is a temporal shift which is in the larger demographic history or disease history of India. The temporal shift, you can map that temporal shift around for her, the 1908, 11, 97, but it is the post-First World War which would say the shift, we can see that. That's well known. How to explain that shift, that also we need to do. So she contributes massively in trying to now disentangle the multiple factors through which this change of, say, both disease lethality and decline of death rate could be explained, or at least explained. So this disentangling is a very important explanatory framework that she uses. Now, to come back to just a point, how does she do it? And there the methodological thing already emphasized by Shiela Zurbrigg is very important. And here, just to, actually she shows that the correlation of rainfall is stronger than the correlation of wheat prices, actually. But only when she disaggregates that the multiple causality and is shown to be working out. It's actually this is the first thing. Actually, correlation of, so what happens is, we know that the argument using correlation or regression analysis cannot lead us to understand the real causal linkages. By this disaggregation, she is actually creating the fuller explanation of a causal by using outliers, by using particular cases. There she could then develop this argument. In fact, at the gross level, the rainfall argument is stronger compared to the price argument. But it is at the disaggregated level. Even there, 24 districts, the rainfall is stronger as a explanatory variable compared to 10 districts where the price variable is right. But when so merely just adding these factors, but how these factors connect to each other, you see it much more. And you're right, absolutely, in pointing out, and I think that's a brilliant methodological move she makes by trying to explain what appears at first level to actually support the vector transmission theory. Actually, when you disaggregate, you find the opposite. And that, not just opposite, you just don't find it opposite. You have to really connect the dots. So even there, you have to really connect. And that's where the leap between a pure correlation and then actually making a plausible connection, a plausible causation, then becomes. And that I thought was a brilliant way she has done, how she has done, using both temporal as well as spatial analysis in that. The second, I think, the point which I think Niladji has much more eloquently spoke, I really was amazed at her policy shifts, the study of how colonial policy actually. We've been studying, first we had gone through a whole range of, when we were young, or at least when we were young, we were all the time given colonial policy, then we had critiques of that, then we went into complex way in which policy went into working out, so then it was not so simple to do it, but here, in the sense you can just say, well, colonial policy was to make India poorer, we had to see it and work it out at the ground level to see a connection and at least a sense of complexity in colonial policy and how it works. Or policy in general, state policy in general, and its impact is not a simple, what do you call, one-to-one relation can be derived from that. And there, the subtle shifts that she notices and she tries to argue, the 4 stages of a policy shifts she makes, one prior to 1908 and one between 1908 and 1911. In 3 years, within that 3 years, between Christopher's study of 1908 and the first conference in 1909 and the second conference in 1911, isn't it? This 3 years itself, you see that this policy shift, you can map. This is the only time, what's a golden age of debates where people are bringing in ideas, Ross's story, and then the shift between that and the 1920s, and from then on 20s, the different stages, she maps it brilliantly. It's not at all linear, linear moving from one stage to other. It has a brilliant complexity of relationship between the past, the first stage, the second stage, the relation between second and third stage, each of them interacting with each other to make for is again not a clear-cut policy. In the 1920s, 30s, still the debates are still going on, but we can see a shift. And that shift has such tremendous impact. So many people did not die. Though my grandfather died in the same period, in 1932 of falciparum malaria in Odisha, which was the hyper-endemic falciparum malaria. My grandfather, age of 30, died in 32, died. And there. So I know that policy has shifted and millions did not die, but my grandfather died. It cannot explain individual deaths. So this shift is, so I found that very fascinating. The structure of the book has already been talked about. I have a final point, which is that how do you, she notices in the overall shift of, let's say, technocratization, which Imrana had pointed out, the technocratization, the shift towards that, how it uncoupled certain things which were commonsensically. Strangely enough, miasma theory might have had a better chance of linking rather than the germ theory in bringing the human factor. Miasma theory perhaps had a slightly better understanding of the relations of human factor in causing diseases than the germ theory or the vector transfer, more scientific theory so much. The way it got as, anyway, we know this, how this shifted from hunger to malnutrition and then on to, what is it called? Micronutrient question. And of course, all these shifts are taking place, or this decoupling which is there is taking place through a certain empowerment of particular technocratic elite, technocrat. the interesting part is this technocratic elite, or part of this technocratic elite, had initiated a critique of this technocentrism. But it is ultimately the victory of technocentric paradigm, which is what we find even today. And today especially, I will just quote a beautiful epigram. In her second book, there are lots of nice, wonderful epigrams. Especially, I just wanted to read out this one, just for the beauty of the choice you have done. This is from Ursula Franklin, who teaches technology, and says, she writes, "When I teach the social impact of technology, I do not find it difficult to make clear to engineers that technology has a social impact. However, it is almost impossible for me to make it clear to them that they are being impacted." You know, this is historians writing about hunger haven't experienced hunger. So it is very difficult. I mean, in a sense, this is an important thing to understand, that she's trying to bring in something which we still are looking from the outside. I'm not saying Christopher experienced hunger or Ross experienced hunger. That is why they could not. Someone experienced hunger. That's why he made the connection. I'm not saying that. I'm merely saying as if all of it is coming from outside, and you have a solution which you can give from. So there again is a Max Planck's quotation she has from Scientific Autobiography of Max Planck. In the new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die. And a new generation grows that is familiar with it. So, you know, it's the most brilliant scientist talking. No, I'm saying that's what has happened. Lots of people would never believe. And that's why Sheila's book is so important today, and we are knowing it. This is the first time over a period of last 40 years at least, that rural poverty levels, at least that government is not publishing, has gone up from 31% in 2011 to 35%. First time a real reversal has happened. We do not know that there has been argued a real decline of per capita availability of food grains, despite all this overthink. And there's an argument that people are moving to much more, you know, they're eating more fish, more like George Bush came and said, no, now they're eating all meat a lot, and we have to leading to climate change and all kinds of things. Anyway, what I mean is, the declining per capita availability may be good for some people, but a large proportion of people are still in the borderline between starvation. And this has not been counted. Poverty is now in pockets. The idea that it has moved away. I think your book is so important to bring back the notion. In tribal areas still now, what Niladri pointed out, the mass destruction of commons, the access to forest, the taking away of the forest right, the minimal forest right which they got in 2006, is ridiculous. We haven't studied it. We have to know it, that there is actually an increase of food insecurity, and that's why it is so crucial for us to bring back the debate, and not just the debate, bring back an understanding which had linked restitution to malaria, which was the victory over malaria. I'm not sure whether it's coming back, isn't it? Some parts of it's coming up. We don't know whether we'll be back again to another hyper-endemic phase, but I'm not looking at that. I'm thankful that your book is timely. It makes such a contribution to our economic history, demographic history, social history. It brings in the history of scientific disease studies in world around, in Italy, in England, and so wonderfully weaves them into the debates which took place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prabhu.